Are you familiar with the characters in the Canadian streaming television program Letterkenny, referred to as the Skids? The all black wearing meth heads who appear to have no career in a small Canadian town of 5,000, but instead spend their days playing video games, but mostly hanging outside the singular small town confectionery store, dancing on broken down cardboard, doing meth, selling meth, chirping the regulars, then dancing some more to their boombox industrial electronica music. There is a Spotify playlist, by the way, for Letterkenny Skids. You can look it up. But if you have seen one episode of Letterkenny, of course you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now imagine that one of those popular skids hits rock bottom and decides to clean up his life, maybe get a job, pursue his dreams, and to get into a treatment program. I am pretty sure step one of said treatment program is to never return to Letterkenny Confectionery Corner or hang out with the skids again. If you want to stay clean, you just can't go back. This is the problem with the music industry. Today, our guest is Leeroy Stagger. And while a big part of Leeroy's story is how alcoholism almost robbed him of the most promising career, but he was thankfully able to get help and turn it around, and now he has a long career, it's unfair to assume that's the whole story, just because I made this entire intro and an adjacent metaphor about it. But Leeroy has continued a career in the music industry, and historically, the music industry has been the primary enabler for a life of substance abuse. It's like going back to the confectionery corner with every single show you play and every event that you attend. Leeroy Stagger is a roots rock, Americana, alt country, you get it, really cool singer-songwriter out of Victoria, BC, in the spirit of Steve Earle, Tom Petty, Ryan Adams, and Jeff Tweedy. And not just in the spirit of, he literally possesses the actual spirit of all those guys. He has released 13 albums in 20 years, toured the world, shared stages with his idols, all while overcoming personal demons and losses and multiple startovers. He continues to make incredible music, including his most recent 3 AM Revelations, and is a genuine light in dark times. My name is Glen Erickson. This is Almost Famous Enough. Thanks for spending your time with us. This is Leeroy Stagger. It's really nice to see you. It's been a really long time, bud.
Been a very long time. God, 5 years?
I can't remember, to be completely honest. I know I've crossed paths with you since all the peak performance things, but I can't place exactly where.
Minimally, yeah.
Yeah, very minimally. Other than just watching all the things you're doing, all the stuff that's coming out. So
a lot of life has happened since then.
Yeah, a lot of life has happened, but I hope to get into it a little bit here with you, if that's okay. I know you must be pretty occupied with a brand new release out. Like, you just released it's your 13th album, 3 AM Revelations. Yeah. Like, that's Wikipedia and Spotify have two different years for your first record, but one says 2004, one says 2005. Regardless, doesn't matter, except when I want to do math, so I'll just make it more even. Like 13 full albums in 20 years is a pretty incredible feat for an artist. Has that been part of your current reflections at all? Is that what happens when we get older and you're still making music?
Yeah, I guess to some degree, more so right now because I just got on my publishing back. And
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I guess just over 7 years ago, I signed a publishing deal with True North, and that was right after Peak Performance Project, and they bought the rights to my whole catalog, which is a lot of records. So they own the catalog for 7 years, and that term is expired, and now I own all my rights again. So that means that I can do whatever I want with my catalog of records. So we're kind of trying to figure it out, and I think we're probably going to do some sort of retrospective, maybe remaster remaster stuff. And I mean, kind of would like to re-record stuff, but I just think that maybe takes away from the spirit of the original releases. So I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. We're talking about it. And I've got 2 records that are in the vault that have never been released, and I'm starting a record next week with Joel Plaskett. So, I mean, we'll just kind of see how it all shakes down.
So maybe for people who are listening and don't sort of understand, the publishing bit, when someone else owns those for 7 years, because for example, like there's some pretty famous deals that have happened over the last 3 or 4 years, right? Where some artists are selling their catalogs for ridiculous amounts of money, some of these marquee people, and then you're restricted. I think people might, who don't understand the business, curious to know what are the restrictions when someone else owns your publishing.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I mean, you kind of want to sign a deal where it's a mutual partnership. My deal with True North was great for me, and I don't know if it was as good for them as they would have liked, but I think it was a great relationship throughout the whole term. So the word is they get to, the wording in the contracts is, or whatever, is that they get to exploit those records for the time that they own them. So they want to try and get them on television shows, and films, on commercials, whatever, or I guess potentially have other artists cover your work. Anytime that your song gets played on the radio, they get a percentage. And I think like there's the mechanical side, there's mechanical, and what's the other side? I still get 50% of whatever the thing is. So that was always great.
You just don't get the say in it if someone wants to use their song for a political rally. And
I don't know. I think like if Bob Dylan's selling his catalog for whatever he sold it for, I'm sure that in the clause that it is, I bet you anything that he probably still has the final say. I mean, I think, I know that anytime I would get a placement or a sync, they would always ask permission if that was cool with me.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I imagine if you got a good contract.
Yeah, it's not always the horror story that we hear about by the time it hits the media, right? Of people who are getting kind of taken advantage of, or they feel like they weren't included anymore, or corporate. I've always had pretty good record deals for the most part. There was some gray area with some things with a European deal that I had for a long time with accounting at the end. But we'll say that the last record deal that I had with True North was a dream come true for me. That's great. So, I mean, obviously as a guy who's put out 13 records over 20 years, you've seen a lot of different things happen in your artistic career. Obviously from what maybe the typical up and coming trying to build a career in the early stages, to being signed, to not being signed, to having a pretty full team, maybe, to the do-it-yourself version. And maybe that's come and gone over the years. So I'm always interested to ask people, because I think to ask you to go all the way back and think, like, does this 20-year career look at all like what you thought it was when you made your first record in 2004? But
I'd imagine. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, actually, let's back up before that, because I'd like to hear a little more about where you came from. I know you grew up and you were more playing in punk bands, and you were in bands before you sort of decided to go your own way and do the name thing. So how did that come about, in what time frame? And am I right thinking you were out on the island growing up, kind of in those formative years? How did that sort of develop into, I want to play music, maybe my parents want me to do something else, but I'm going to do this, and then people start responding and you start doing stuff? How did that happen for you?
Yeah, well, my parents have never really said boo about what they wanted me to do. I don't think they ever talked about anything like that when I was a kid. They've always been supportive of my career. I just think they always are. My parents were never together while I was conscious of it. I come from a blue collar upbringing. My dad's a car mechanic. My brothers are all in the trades. So I grew up on the island here with very much hunting, fishing, race cars, dirt bikes. And I guess, I'm a product of, like I said, parents were never together, and then step parents, there's divorces. So I was always kind of left to my own devices a lot of the time, especially with emotional issues. I grew up in a pretty abusive situation for the kind of formative years of my childhood, and just kind of escaped into music and radio when I was little. So what I was hearing on the radio was things like Soul Asylum's Runaway Train, Madonna's This Used to Be My Playground, bands that, I don't know, I guess like REM. It was like kind of that era of 90s, late 80s, 90s, kind of roots pop, rock, Bottle Rockets, bands like that were on mainstream radio in Victoria. And then, of course, I would get the radio from across the Georgia Strait into Vancouver and into Seattle. So I was listening, late at night when I was supposed to be sleeping, I would put my covers over my head and I'd take my little clock radio and I'd tune into KASM out of Seattle or Z93 out of Vancouver, and just kind of get lost in these little worlds. And it was the first time that I actually felt moved by art, So that, and then my grandpa was in radio for 50 years, and I did work experience at the radio station that would, later on go to add my songs, which is really, really cool to go and go do work experience in elementary and high school. And I remember they actually put me on air for 15 minutes. They're like, okay, you just go for it. And, so
a different era back then.
Yeah, it was cool. And then, out of high school, I was really into punk rock in high school. And I remember going to see the Rolling Stones. I was probably in junior high. And that was the first time that I'd ever been exposed to anything like that in a live setting. And I was like, that's kind of what I want to do, which is a blessing and a curse, because you're set the bar high.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
so what was the draw to punk? What was the draw to punk? Was there a version of punk? I mean, that would have been early or mid 90s punk, wherein it was like, there's the version that was always underground, punk. Like there was like the SNFUs going around and playing all the small things, but then there was all of a sudden Green Day signs a mainstream record deal and you have a whole new version of punk. What was the draw? I mean, there's a little analysis that isn't a hard reach of, teens who were escaping things and into music often found their way into that genre,
heavier
all the
music.
subgenres, even heavier music, that had a lot of angst and expression. Was that
in hindsight it started, of course. In hindsight, it started with Green Day, with Dookie for sure, because there's angry music. I declare I don't care no more. It's just like when a kid hears that, comes from a troubled home, go, oh shit, okay, finally art that speaks to how I feel. And so Green Day, Offspring, I was still probably junior high, then maybe even late elementary school or middle school or whatever it was called. And I remember distinctly, but I remember also hearing, like, through friends, older siblings, hearing the Lemonheads and some of those other kind of those like 90s alt bands. But as soon as I heard Green Day, it was on. And then of course through Green Day and skateboarding, you kind of get into, remember those compilations were really huge. So then it was NoFX, Propaganda. But then when I got to high school and started going to punk shows here in Victoria, of course we have the Dayglow Abortions here in Victoria. So that was like, you go see the Dayglows, like, this is a whole nother level of aggression, punk rock and humor. And so then you start to get into those kind of bands, which I guess would be Dayglows. And then I always was kind of attracted to the bands that were on the rock and roll spectrum of things. So Super Suckers were one of my favorite bands. Black Halos was my favorite band for quite a long time, and I befriended the guys in the Black Halos. I was even going to try out for bass for them for a while, and I remember I was living with the Hot Heat guys, and basically, begging them to show me how to play bass.
That's
on
great.
These Black Halos records. But I chickened out from auditioning, but which is for the better, I think. But so heavy music, and then probably through the Super Suckers, I heard Steve Earle, and through my best friend Tyson, he played me El Corazon one day, and I was like really into it. And I thought, looking through the booklets on the CD, which is, you know, a shame that is kind of gone by the wayside. But I looked at the credits, and I'm like, holy shit, the Super Suckers are on this record. About just over 10 years ago, I was opening up for Steve in Chicago, and I told the story about how I came to his music. And Ron Heathman from the Super Suckers, who's passed away a couple of years ago now, but he came up to me and said, I'm Ron from the Super Suckers. Like, thank you for telling that story. Yeah, so it had totally come full circle. So, you know, through that period of punk rock, which was important in going to all ages shows, but then kind of getting into the harder punk rock, which led to harder drinking, harder drugs for me. You know, I don't regret that period of time, and I still love that kind of music, but I just wish I was a little more aware of the pitfalls that were available for a young kid that looked up to older people that were maybe not the best role models at the time. And then, you know, that just naturally, through bands like the Super Suckers, bands like Social Distortion, starts to lead to roots music, right? Like Mike Ness was singing Johnny Cash covers, and you start to go, oh, what's all this stuff about? And then I came into roots music through Steve Earle and Ryan Adams, and Ryan Adams was like a big one for me back then, because I'd never seen anybody with jet black hair and a Ramones t-shirt playing an acoustic guitar and making music that sounded like Tom Petty. And I went, oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Leeroy, because I've wanted to put you right on that one for a long time, but it's felt not right to even for the last 3 or 4 years. He's had a bit of a cloud over his name, obviously. But aside from that, he was very formative for me too. And I know from when I began, you got on my personal radar around your Radiant Land record, I think.
Oh, cool.
But, you know, it was honestly, I would say it was the Everything Is Real record, which came out, I think, after when we met and got to hang out at the Peak Performance Project stuff. That felt like the rock and roll album to me from Ryan Adams much. Besides a lot of that stuff. So I love that, you know, that's just an honest influence for you, because I can hear it so much. They just seem to fit and blend. I mean, there's a couple of things I definitely want to talk about you, because I love your experience and that you're willing to talk about it. But to sort of move where we were moving, I'm curious then, like, so you had entries and you had gateways into essentially the kind of career in music that you've created, as far as sort of genre and what quote unquote lane you ended up in. So you didn't make a record, like your first record lands you in that, you know, as Leeroy Stagger. I'm wondering how that specifically came to you starting to make music, and that was the kind of music you made, what people were around you were responding to, or whether you just needed to make that sort of a thing.
No, it was very much the people who were around me at the time. So, like I said, I was in a punk rock band called the Staggers with my best friend Tyson. You definitely met along the way. He's coming in from Alberta today, actually. Is it? So the Staggers was great, really fun, ridiculous, you know, lots of stories. That disbanded. I held up with the Hot Heat guys, because we played some shows together, and they really liked what I was doing and liked that I was crazy and had these great antics and was, you know, inspired by Billy Hopeless from the the Black Halos, and so we became fast friends. And I toured around with them for a couple of years, lived with them, made some music with them, and we used to hang out at this bar called Logan's. And I remember being on the Hot
Is
Hot
it
Heat
still
bus.
there? Is
No,
Logan's Pub still there?
It's shut down, which is
Oh, that's
a
too
shame.
bad.
But I remember being on the Hot Hot Heat bus with Ryan Adams, I think it was the rock and roll record, and maybe Gold, and they were pissed off that I was listening to it, but I was so obsessed with this sound. So after that tour, I stepped off the bus and was like, here I go. Like, this is what I'm going to do. So that time in Victoria was insane. It was so cool for roots music. And it was all based around Carol and Mark and Tolan McNeil and their house on Chambers Street. And also the Hootenanny that Carolyn would host every Sunday at Logan's. And this thing, it was nuts. It was essentially an open mic for roots musicians, but she would pick kind of the better of the songwriters.
She'd actually curate an open stage. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and then after the Hootenanny, we'd go to Carolyn and Tolan's house and we'd party and we'd play guitars in the kitchen and we'd smoke and drink, and there would be sometimes some snacks. And that was what we did every Sunday, unless Carolyn was on tour, and then we wouldn't go to her house, but we'd still do the nanny. And so through that, I can't remember who it was that was maybe Carolyn had got me up, or someone had got me up at the Hootenanny to play some of my songs. And, I was young and had black hair and looked like Ryan Adams in a leather jacket and was punk, kind of transitioning into music. And so Tolan would make records in the basement of that house. And finally, when I was stupid enough to convince him to make a record on me, when I really had no business making a record, we made a record called Six Tales of Danger, which was an EP that turned into a record called Dear Love. And right off the bat, a label called Magic Teeth, who put out some really cool indie records at the time, Run Chico Run, and I can't remember who else now. They decided to put out Dear Love. And through that, I had met Danny Michel. Somehow I'd become a fan of his. And we had talked about making a record. So at that time, Magic Teeth had put out some money to go make a record with Danny. A label called Boompa came out of Vancouver and decided to sign me. In the midst of that, I don't think they ever really did pay Gareth from Magic Teeth for putting all that money out. But bless Gareth, he's a patron saint of the arts, at this point. And we had a good laugh about that a couple years ago too. But right off the bat, and I remember through the Hot Hot Heat connection too. I remember I got a phone call, at my mom's house. And my mom called, or my mom says, someone's on the phone from New York, or from a record label from New York. And they were interested in signing me right off the bat. I was just like, what? Oh, what? This is crazy.
Wow.
So I didn't end up signing that, but I signed with Boompa out of Vancouver because I thought, I guess I had some foresight to think, well, someone out of Vancouver is going to be easier for me than New York.
Yeah.
And that started a very long relationship with Boompa. They managed me and they put out my records. And we had a really good run, for the most part. And then, of course, the business collapsed in whatever that was, 2003 or 2006 or something, 2008 maybe, where everything was transitioning to streaming and Napster and basically pirating music. So that label collapsed. Sadly. I mean, I remember being on tour in the States and I was in all the magazines and I was meeting every big city I'd go into. I would go to the distributor and play for all the people. And by the end of the tour, all those folks that I just met and who were championing my record they were all losing their jobs. So, but again, I was still too young to understand any aspect of the business, and I was drinking heavily and
were you still navigating that stuff by yourself? Had you formed any relationship with any kind of a manager or agent or anybody? Or were you trying to figure it out? Or talking to your buddies
I had management through Boompa. Shannon Martin managed me for a long time out of
Okay.
Boompa.
Yeah, I know Shannon.
Yeah, what she managed Dan for a while too. So like yes, guiding, yes, like they were good at the business end of things. And maybe maybe they had life just advice for me at the time, and maybe I just didn't want to listen to it. But
Yeah.
and I was also kind of around great music business people, like my friend Blaine Kaplan, who he tour managed Hot Heat. That's how I got to know him. And we stayed good friends. I'd go hang out with him in California and do all sorts of dumb stuff with him. But he managed the Sublime estate at the time and managed Cornelius from Japan. He manages Guitarras Hermanos now. So he was always a really good business mentor for me. But I just don't think I was ready or fully formed as an artist then to kind of do anything significant. I wasn't mentored artistically. And, you can't go back.
Is anybody?
Well,
I mean, how do we mentor people?
I work with a lot of young artists now, and I do my best.
Well, I mean, that's a good point. Like you have a recording studio, you do producing. So now for that window of time, you're in a relationship with them. Yeah, that's a really good point. I just asked the question, how do we mentor artists? And now I can think of right off the bat, people telling stories of how some producer really kind of put people on the right path.
Well,
that's pretty cool.
I think I make a point to do as much as I can, because for that exact reason, not because I need the accolades or whatever, because I want artists to make healthy decisions and also make sound decisions on where their next step is, because nobody, I mean, I did have great mentors and people like John Ellis and stuff like that, but that lasts for so long, I guess. I don't know. I'm working with a band right now called Pony Gold, and I chop in the record for them and I sent it to 3 labels today.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, if I don't do that, who else is going to do that?
Well, I know what you mean.
Like,
I remember Chris Winters of Captain Tractor recorded my band's first record with us, and he put his neck on the line all over the place. He didn't have to, but he was doing the same thing. Yeah, it's pretty significant to an up and coming artist.
Well, I had 8 songwriters at the house yesterday for a song circle. It was the first time we'd done that, and because I've been back here on the island for 5 years, and one thing I just like, there's no community here. There's like that I had in Southern Alberta. It certainly doesn't exist like it did back in the day when I was kicking around with Carolyn and all those guys. So I thought, well, instead of bitching about it and complaining about it, why don't I do something about it?
Yeah, who else but you?
We hosted the Song Circle last night, and it was amazing, and it was so great. And, I'm not going to say anything unless I'm asked, but a lot of these young artists are asking me, what do you think about this bridge? What do you think about this? And it's like, as a producer, you just, I'm happy to get my hands dirty. And like, that is a mentorship. I never had that growing up, and I wish I did. And I mean, I in a lot of ways I did have that. People like Tola and Dan Weisenberger taught me about guitar tone or something like that. Yeah. But,
well, that's a great point, Leeroy. It makes me think of, because I've actually had the good fortune already, a couple of the guests on the podcast have been involved in that Peak Performance Project development program / contest. And you were in the second year of the Alberta one in 2015, I believe. And so you got to experience the thing that we sort of laughed about, which was at the boot camp where people would play a 3-song set, and then they'd almost have like an American Idol panel of people give them some feedback. And it's a palpable memory of how many artists had never actually had somebody stand up and tell them what they thought about their song structure. Like I'll never forget Ryan Gouldman of Mother Mother always telling everybody, it became a bit of a meme around the camp afterwards of, that chorus is actually a pre-chorus. You need to go write a real chorus all the time.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of places for people to get mentored. I think that's it's pretty sweet if your songwriting circle turns into an opportunity for you to use everything you've learned, help people out.
Well, it's going to only make me a better songwriter too, right? Being around songwriters is great. But so many of them are just kind of out in outer space with no mentorship on how to to just be in the world. You know what I mean? Like, so much of it is just how do you be in the world healthily in this world that we do. So I want to, if there's people that need that, I'm always here to help. And I try to do that with people that I work with. Sometimes, like, I've got a pretty good bullshit detector for nefarious people. And I've tried to get into mentorship positions with artists that I admire, and I've seen the good and the bad of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, I'm a little bit picky with who I bring into my circle, but I'm always available for advice, I guess.
If it's okay, let me dive into that a little bit about your life and how you've, I think, accumulated a lot of the right experiences to give the right kind of advice. From what I've observed,
like the right experiences in doing the wrong thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Right, that's a great way to put it. The right experience in doing the wrong thing. You already alluded to your early days, which I think are pretty typical of people who are just losing themselves in music and their scene, and maybe trying to escape from whatever's happening in their life or their whatever. About alcoholism and partying and just being crazy, which is maybe a rite of passage for adolescence, obviously, for just age, but it kind of gets fueled. It's different now, and you can maybe comment on what scenes and industry is like now, but I know like the 90s into the 2000s was still the stereotype heyday of
sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, absolutely. And I know that's a big part of your story, and I'm wondering if you can tell a little bit about that, because I know it's a big part of your story, how you, as I've heard you tell it before, got lost in it for a while, and if you could sort of give a picture about what that looked like and how you're able to get out of it, and how, I don't know, like, put it this way. I mean, I've talked to a few people who are in treatment or in AA, right? And you hear
recovery,
them and recovery, and for them, they couldn't go back to the job, perhaps if the job was part of the thing that introduced them to it, right? But the music industry, you can't get away from it. So,
well, my version of the industry is very different now than it used to be.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. And also that era was really dark. I mean, it was fun, but in hindsight, it was rough. And there wasn't a lot of people kind of checking things and going, "Hey, are you okay?" Maybe let's just put it this way. My situation had progressed to a point where the last thing I cared about was performing. I just couldn't wait to get off stage so I could drink myself to sleep. And got to the point where I couldn't get myself from gig to gig. The last kind of tour before first time I got sober, I couldn't physically get myself from Kelowna to Edmonton. And someone in the other band I was touring with had to drive my vehicle with me in it to Edmonton. And then I realized I'd kind of hit my rock bottom on that end of that tour, and realized I needed to change because I did want to play music and want to be in that world, but I realized that I wasn't going to be able to. And so I ended up getting sober. I got sober on tour in Alaska, of all places, in the winter.
What year was this?
17 years ago. So whatever that is, I don't know what year that will be, but 17 years this year. And I'd gotten sober for a month, and then I flew to Scotland to tour over there. And I thought, well, I'll just try ska. I'd never really gone down that road yet. And so then, and then that was in like a November of that year. And then by January, I was in Alaska and realized I ended up going to an AA meeting just by chance, by these two artists I was touring with. They were going, and I said, "Where are you going?" And they're like, "Oh, we're just going to a thing here." And I kept pushing them, "Well, where are you going?" And they finally said, "Well, we're going to an AA meeting." And I said, "Well, I'll go." And they're like, "Really?" I said, yeah. And they're like, we figured you had a good 10 years left in you still. But I went to an AA meeting and I that was it. I never drank. I haven't drank since,
Yeah.
And I worked a program and still work a program. And there was a period for about 3 years after I'd gotten sober. I felt pretty lost in the music business. I felt like I'd burnt a lot of bridges. I felt like people weren't really paying attention to what I was doing. I think I'd lost my record deal. And I mean, the business was bad enough, but maybe that, now that I'm saying it out loud, maybe that was just a result of getting lazy as an artist in the last couple of years and kind of falling into my addiction. So I felt like I had to really start to dig myself out of that pit. And Peak Performance Project was kind of the first time where people started to take me seriously again. And of course I won that thing. And I don't have anything bad. It was an incredible experience. I think I went into that thing different than most of the other artists there. And I know me and you have talked about that a lot in the past, but, I had something to prove, you know what I mean? Like I said, I felt like I was pretty low going into that thing. And as it progressed, I realized like I've actually got a lot to offer what's happening here. And I have to prove it to myself that I'm an artist. I'm also I need to be entertaining. I need to find my spirit and get my spirit back. So of course, I won that thing. And then right before I won, of course, there was management offers, label offers.
Yeah.
And I said to the management offers, a lot of it was like, let's just wait and see if you win. And I was like, nah, either you sign me now before they announce winners or fuck you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And Kate Waddy was like, yep, I'm in, let's do it. So I've been with Kate since. So I guess that's coming up on 10 years.
That's great.
And I signed with True North right away. I signed with True North. They bought two new records, and they bought my whole back catalog. And so it was like game on after Peak. And it was like, okay, you're an artist. I built the studio. I built the Rebeltone Ranch in Lethbridge. That was incredible. I made Love Verses, which is, my most successful record to date. And then I made Strange Path. And, we had Pete Thomas from the Attractions come up from LA, and Paul Rigby and Brad Barr and the Barr Brothers come in to produce my records out of this great studio. And it was cool. Fantastic. And I worked with some great artists in there, Corb Lund and Misha and the Spanks, and Chip Taylor rolled in one day and we cut a really cool song. It was great. And then of course, Strange Path had just come out. We were touring that. I think it confused some people. And then of course the pandemic hits, and halfway through April, maybe. I'd started a record. I'd made a record called Dystopian Weekends in Vancouver in March of 2020. So that session didn't get cut short, but the day that we finished, I was racing home because they were starting to close all the schools.
Yeah.
And we thought the world was ending. So then, that goes on for a couple months. And I just looked at my wife, Kobe, and I said, I think it's time to leave. Like, I think I need to leave Alberta. I don't think, I was kind of like, I don't know if this is where I want to ride out a global pandemic. And I saw what was happening politically. And we sold our house with that beautiful studio, and we came out here to the coasts, and I had my small little studio, and I loved it. It was great. It was like I had this little apartment and a recording, and it was a recording studio. And then, of course, in 2021, we had a major atmospheric river come through, and it put 3 feet of water in my studio and completely destroyed the studio.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was traumatic. There's actually a documentary. I just saw the first cut yesterday, and it's beautiful. It's about the last 3 years of my life, starting, I guess, based around the flood and it has a huge trauma piece. Of course, we talked a little bit about my childhood, which is very traumatic. I lost a brother very young. So this documentary covers this, and then the last couple of years of kind of regaining my spirit, finding who I truly am through art. It's a beautiful film. My friend Erica Chan made it. I'm excited. We're trying to figure out how do you get eyeballs on this thing?
Yeah.
So it also talks about the flood and then the rebuild of this new studio space that I have now, which was again built from the ground up, like Lethbridge. It's about half the size, maybe even a little smaller. So it's a small version of that, but it's a great studio.
It's beautiful. The pictures are beautiful. Yeah. I've seen you post online. I want to ask you, Leeroy, because so this over 20-year span, it's not just restricted to when you released albums, obviously, that you've just pursued this life. I mean, we've just briefly touched on in a few minutes some like incredible highs and incredible lows that someone might go through, right? Like being able to escape from the thing maybe you want to escape from, even if when we're young, it's a little more subconscious than conscious, but to be able to get the kind of responses you had to start to get some success, get calls from a New York record deal. I think the very first time I heard your name was someone saying, have you heard about Leeroy Stagger? He like landed a song at the end of Grey's Anatomy or something, which back then paid a lot of money, right? So then artists are going to talk to each other about that. Like, hey, this like local Canadian guy got a song, a placement. And that was just a brand new world at the time. Yeah, twice. So, so you've had these things happen, and then you hit rock bottom, as you said, in your personal life. And the alcoholism caught up with you, and you have to rebuild that. You get into the Peak Performance Project.
We didn't even talk about Danny Goldberg.
Yeah, I haven't even talked about some of this stuff. And you've got these like ups and downs, and then you build a studio. You move, you rebuild a studio again. It floods. You have to rebuild it again. I guess the thread I'm really curious about you, Leeroy, is what's the thing that keeps you going? Most artists can't even put a second or a third record together, let alone 13 through those kind of highs that make you think I'm going to be okay forever, to probably feeling like I don't know what tomorrow is quite often. So what's the thing? What's it been for you? I know I've watched you make some choices with your health and running and be open about that. I'm just wondering what the things are that have kept you going through these kinds of ebbs and flows, man.
Probably stubbornness more than anything. That kind of I told you so, because I've just been told so many times along the way, or pushed aside as not the cool person. I mean, of course, I've had those moments where I've been the cool person, but honestly, I really do feel like all of that, and even the film kind of portrays this, has led up to now, which is, this is what it's been portraying or pushing me, funneling me towards, which is maybe I'm supposed to be a light in the wilderness, a mentor for these great artists to do this, to not have to suffer in the ways that maybe I've had to. But also, like, for me personally, I'm more content with myself than I've ever have been. And, I'm not as famous or big as an artist as some of my friends, but I've managed to have a career doing this. And, I live in a really cool home with a beautiful studio attached to it, with two really lovely artistic kids and a healthy marriage. I've kind of won the fucking lottery. What more could I ask for? You know what I mean? Like, I see some of my friends that are, more famous and busier, and I see the terror in their, it's a lot of the time where, it's just I've kind of scooted this great, like, middle way. As a Buddhist, we talk about the middle way a lot. And So I think the way that to answer your question, I've just held on the whole time and I just never backed down. You know what I mean? I just never backed down from being told certain things, and also like having moments in my life in this career where I've been pushed around by some really big people, and it's broken my spirit. It's broken my spirit, but there was always been some sort of underdog quality in my heart that says, well, okay, you broke my spirit, but now I'm going to build it up better, and not to spite you, but I'm going to prove to myself that I'm worthy as a creator, worthy as a human being to help people and in the process heal myself. You know, in AA, we talk about the 12th step and is of being of service to people in recovery. So in some ways, my career is a 12th step for people, not necessarily in recovery, but people that need some sort of guiding help, you know, having a sober voice in a pretty chaotic landscape. That's kind of why I'm here and why I choose to stay here.
That's a really beautiful sentiment, Bud. I mean, I feel like the older I get, obviously, I think I'm farther along than you. It becomes even more and more polarizing the longer I meet the people who have been around to be, are you in the jaded camp or are you in the optimistic camp? And it can often feel like the jaded are the louder voices, especially if you still attend music conferences or any of these panel discussions or industry sessions, or I can't imagine now, like that used to be for us the only way we actually heard from all those people. And now obviously in the way the world is in social media and accessibility to information, you could be literally just overwhelmed with all of these different messages. So being a light to people is pretty incredible. I think also, and tell me, I wondered this observation, and then you started talking at the very beginning just about your family and where you come from, and you know the way your music has evolved. I feel over this time, and even reading what's been written about the new record. I mean, everybody always, their bio always says it's like their best work to date, but it feels like there's a different kind of sincerity with you in this one, in this record, about saying that. And I think it's interesting that it has this sort of zen-ness of being at peace with yourself, but even sitting in the pocket musically feels so well tied to where you came from and the land you're talking about, and the hunting, the fishing, we're blue collar workers, we're that version of society, right? Of how people sort of live together. It feels like it sits in that pocket really well. And I'm wondering if you felt like there was that kind of a reconciling, if I want to use that word, with the past.
That's a good observation. But truth be told, it took me 3 times to make this record. Like I recorded it 3 times, and to mastering and everything.
Like the same songs, the whole works, all the way through.
Yeah. So the first version of it is a really cool version. I recorded it in the basement studio before it got destroyed, and it was I made it in lockdown. So the drums were recorded in Los Angeles. Pete Thomas tracked it in Los Angeles, and that was a cool version. And then I had a bit of a falling out with the co-producer at the end of it, and that just kind of sullied it for me. And then I realized, okay, well, like coming out of the lockdown shit, you just felt icky about all that stuff, right? And I just felt like I need something raw and real, and so then I booked a session in Vancouver at Afterlife, and it was a 7-piece band, live off the floor, no headphones. So that was the second iteration of it. And then that session, on the 3rd or 4th day, the engineer got COVID and shut the whole session down. And I had, I had half the band had flown in for the session.
Yeah, that's
so so we finished the record, and it was cool. But again, I was ready to pull the trigger on it. It was ready to go. We mastered it. And then again, I just balked again. Once again, I balked at it, and I had just finished my new studio and started kind of messing around on some things. That's right. And there's a couple managers in my circle that were like, this record's great, Leeroy. But it's a bedroom record. It's a headphone record, and it doesn't have any singles. And I thought, motherfucker, like, okay. All right. Again, it's that, I'll show you then. So I wrote, what did I write? I wrote, Watermelon Pink, which is, it's a single, it's a banger. And then we tried to put it with the other stuff. I'm like, this doesn't fit. Let me just write it. Let me rewrite this whole record. Let me recut it. And then I cut Dennis Ellsworth's Count to 10, which I think was a fucking brilliant song. And also I wrote, Mediocrity Pill with Jay from Bedouin Soundclash. And then I just kind of was on this whole nother tangent of this record that became 3 AM Revelations. So yeah, it does. It feels like a really it just feels like a really, I don't want to say confident record, but it feels like that's what I wanted to do. And it feels very settled. And, I think it's the best record I've written. I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it's close. It's up there. It feels really, really solid to me. Love Versus is every time I go back to that record, I was like, wow, I was into it on that one. Strange Path, I'm really proud of too, actually. But 3 AM Revelations is great. I mean, we live in a world now where everything's so quick, right?
Yeah.
And I've always been an artist where, I'm always on to the next thing.
Well, that kind of shows in how much you've produced. That's for sure.
Well, yeah. And I don't feel like I'm super prolific. You know what I mean? But I'm also
you just keep moving. You just keep doing.
But why? But it's also like, if we're fucking disciplined and we're professionals, like why can't I write 10 to 12 songs in a year? You know what I mean? Like,
well, 100%. Like that doesn't get talked about.
Yeah, and to that for that respect, like I'm not making a record a year anymore. I'm writing a lot, but I'm also abandoning a hell of a lot more than I ever have, or just leaving songs because I'm going, they're not as good as I think they should be, especially when I'm producing so many great artists right now. They're setting the bar, you know what I mean? So they're inspiring me to write. Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, I was going to ask you
start a record
about
on Monday.
that. Well, I was going to ask you about that because I always find it. You that made the statement. I'm always kind of on to the next thing, and I'm always interested. If when we've been in it this long, what is still inspiring you? Like when we're first starting, we're always inspired, right? Those first handful of records. So we're often just trying to recreate the thing that our heroes were making, because we want to be part of that same fabric, right? Like for you, Steve Earle, and you had a great chance to actually play with him and meet the man who was an inspiration and idol. But you get another 10 years down the road, like what's the thing that's inspiring you now when it comes to creating?
Yeah, it's not. I think I've abandoned trying to be my heroes in the last few records, and that's probably why they're so good and people respect them more than ever. I am just really, I have no desire to be, I don't have any desire to have a hit song on the radio, or, you talked about Ryan Gilderman from Mother. I just they're so big right now. I'm so happy for their success, but I can't help but feel that there's a lot of suffering in success. I don't know. I saw them at the airport the other day.
He has a history. Go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
Go ahead. No, I saw them at the other day at the airport, and I don't know if Ryan recognized or not, but I was kind of I had just flown in and I was tired. But I just looked at it. I'm like, that doesn't look like somebody who's getting what they wanted in life. You know what I mean?
Well, he's got a history like you of some overcoming substances and stuff. And
I hope that it's great, and I hope it's everything that they wanted. But I know a lot of famous people, and I don't want that, what they have to deal with, or the kind of people that it's kind of turned them into, or like the self-importance of it all. Because at the end of the day, it's like, are people going to be listening to our records in 100 years? Are people going to be listening to the Beatles in 100 years? Probably not. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
what we do is like it matters in the moment, and it matters in the people that we touch, and it matters in our circles, in our houses, in
Yeah.
our families,
Yeah.
and in the relationships that we have with our kids and the people that need us. Like I I I have time for anybody that comes to my shows. I hang out at the merch table at all the breaks, and I talk to everybody that is there to see me or that needs me or needs to tell me how my music or my voice on the radio helped them through a really tough time. I have time for all those people. And if I was, somebody else, or I, my more famous friends, they don't have the time for that. And I think that's the whole reason why I guess am where I am, I suppose.
Yeah.
Is that I have the opportunity to connect with those people in a real tangible, important way.
Well, that's very inspiring all by itself. Just, I think anytime you see somebody who's in alignment, I've been using this word in my life a lot lately. I recently had to deliver a speech at my father-in-law's funeral, and I just talked about how impacting it is. Like, you never, I guess I use the word, you never really know how crooked you are until you're pushed up against somebody so perfectly aligned, right?
Wow,
And it's another version of being a light to people, I think, where you're not doing it, to spite them or to hold other people down, but you're willing to allow that version of yourself impact the people around you. And it does, like, it can't help but do so. And I just want you to know, I find that really inspiring. It was really interesting to know where you're at now, based on your music as the thing I can most observably take in and understand, but also just wanting to know a bit about your personal journey and your perspectives on the things. So is there tours planned for the new record, or is there the typical rollout, or is that different at this stage for you as well?
No, it's different at this stage. I don't really have the desire to push like I used to. So I go on tour. I've been on tour for the last year. I just don't tour long like I used to anymore, but I've opened up a bunch of new markets that, like, the Maritimes and Ontario and Quebec are finally starting to happen for me, which is really, really great.
That's cool.
So yeah, I've toured pretty extensively last year. I toured with Steve Earle. I toured a bunch on my own. Toured with Frazee Ford a little bit before that. So I just toured in Alberta for 5 shows. I go on tour in May. That's the next run, is May. So I'm basically producing records. I'm starting a Leeroy record next week with Joel Plaskett. We're just figuring out how the technical aspects of that.
You're at the opposite ends of the country still?
No, Joel's here. He's living.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he lives most of the time here. He still goes back to Halifax quite a bit. But he's got an 8-track tape machine here at my studio that he wants to make this record on. So we're going to try that out next week and start seeing how that works. And it's a completely different record than I've ever made. So, and again, that'll be the next journey to see where that goes. And I mean, talk about a mentor. He's just a beautiful mentor and brilliant mind, and one of my favorite artists who we've just become great friends through life and philosophy. And but as far as like the old traditional ways, like I have actually very little desire to do an album cycle thing. I don't know. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't know. Well, I don't know that I'll be going to the United States at the foreseeable future, if ever again. I don't know. I don't want to say never, but that's kind of where things were starting to take off for me. But I just, also, like, philosophically, like, I have to decide what's best for my spirit, and going there is not what I want to do.
So you have a record then. I mean, you have lots of ways to promote that. Thankfully, you don't have to get on the road and the streets the same way as we used to. But I mean, and it seems like you
I'll be
always
honest
have
with you.
a
Like,
record.
I don't have any desire to promote anything. Other like people should, I want people to come to that record
Yeah.
on their
Yeah, I
own. You know
get
what I
that.
mean? Like
I get that.
it's been out for a while, and I've toured a fair bit on it already, and it's
Yep.
sold a bunch of copies that have gotten off my shelves, which is at the house, which is great. And then I'll go on
Yeah.
tour in May, and I'll probably tour the summer on it, and then I'll probably put out either that film in the fall, or I'll put out this record with Joel in the fall,
Yeah.
and then I'll see where that goes.
And a cycle might be, I'm going to guess, a little not just harder but less appealing. You've filled some spaces in your life with like it seems you're consistently producing work for other people at the studio.
Yeah.
You have the radio show on CKUA still, Dirty Windshields.
Yeah.
Which that's a once a week program?
Yeah, once a week, and mostly pre-record it. Sometimes we'll do it live if for fundraiser or if I'm in Alberta. But the studio, the producing is very, it's busy. It's too busy, and I am craving touring a bit more, but it's got to be quality touring. I'm very picky with how I tour now. Just preserve
you've
my
earned the
mental
right
health.
to be picky.
Yeah, no, I have. And it's not like I can go and play big theaters like some of my contemporaries, but I can play small theaters, and I mostly sell out the shows that we play now, which is great. And so I mean, but I do have a desire I think we might go to Australia later in the year for the first time. So anywhere that's like exciting, that culturally I want to go, I'm interested in. We just don't have the desire to slog out on the road like I used to. And it's great when you're support act on a bigger tour, because
takes the pressure off.
It does take the pressure off. It's kind of my favorite way to do it. And it's usually pretty comfy, as long as the group that you're supporting or the artists that you're supporting are kind and not assholes.
Very true. General rule, right? Well, I mean, this has been a blast, buddy. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me and talk a little bit about your journey and your experiences. I think it's always incredible to talk to anybody who's been able to stay in it this long, and maybe it's directly just due to stubbornness. I'm sure there's a lot of other great factors in there, none the least of which is that you are an incredible talent. You've made some great music consistently throughout your career. Obviously, it's music that connects with people, which is probably the thing I loved being able to witness firsthand, being so close to you around that peak performance time and seeing some of your performances and just the way you approached people, and you were like a soft place to fall for a lot of artists that would be able to come and talk to you and be around you. And I think that's a incredible characteristic that always kind of struck me. So I just want to say thanks for taking the time, talking a little bit about, the things that you've experienced and gone through. And you're a super inspiration to me, and I just wish you best of luck. I'm really looking forward to this documentary film, so I'm going to super keep my eyes. I hope that you release that in the fall and not sit on it too long, because now I'm really interested. But
maybe I'll see if I can send you a rough cut. You can have a look. And
I would love it.
And thank you for the kind compliments, and you've always been one of the good ones. So I appreciate you, and
that's nice. Thank you.
Appreciate your spirit, and I appreciate your taste in music. And I don't know, I'm stoked for you with your podcast, and excited to see what you got coming up too.
Okay, bud.
Hey, I'm Alexi. Stick around for post fame with me and my dad.
This is what we're doing. Anyhow.
Yep.
Now people know. Anyhow, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
Okay, I'm fine. I just feel like I haven't talked to you much today. But
no, we have not been friends. But that's okay.
I don't know that I'd clarify it that way, but that's all right. Yeah, we didn't see very much of each other. And then supper was a little disappointing. and then you had to run errands, and now.
Okay, so you found that too? Because I was just complaining to Mom about that.
Yeah, no, I think we're absolutely done with trying those roasts in a crock pot. The world has figured it out. I've Googled lots of things. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on. We need some kind of revolution, a crock pot
I
revolution, or it's completely done in this house.
I think we're cursed. I think that's all.
Maybe like we've figured a lot of cool things out in the last couple of years when it comes to cooking supper. And that is like, when you think that someone looks really good and then they take their socks off and then their toes are disgusting.
No, it's like
The
in
crock
COVID
pot
when you
meal
thought
is the
you and then
ugly.
their mask came off.
During COVID.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it too.
We take the lid off and it smells so good. You come home and
Exactly.
you're so excited.
Okay.
The lid comes off and you're like, oh,
That's a little better of an analogy. Okay, so our crockpot roasts are the bad mask reveal of the COVID era. Very good point. Okay, Leeroy Stagger, a guy that I've always had so much respect for. So I guess right off the bat, like what I didn't go into with him, quick little story for you. You want to hear my quick little story about Leeroy?
always.
Okay,
Yep.
so we sort of referenced him winning the Peak Performance Project the second year that it was in Alberta, the $100,000 prize. Back in, I guess that would be maybe 2015. And when I first went out to the boot camp for that, which was like right at the end of August, the last week of August, I was really looking forward to meeting him because that would be the first time him and I had actually sort of met other than passing in hallways or in backstages or things like that. So I had to tell him the story of, okay, I think I told you this story recently, Lexi. Do you remember my friend Brett gave us tickets to the Grapes of Wrath? They had a show, that old like late 80s, 90s band, Canadian band that I loved. And so we went out to Sherwood Park and we saw them play. That was just like November, maybe?
That was just recent.
Yeah, that was very recent. Okay. And maybe you overheard me telling this story to Brett and his wife about this story, which was that I was a huge Grapes of Wrath fan when I was in college, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so then when I was in the band, the Wee Pool, we were playing a local show. We got added as an opener to Leeroy Stagger, who was touring and doing pretty well at the time. Is it coming back to you right now? Okay.
Yeah,
so
the dots are there.
Yeah. So as the story goes, we did our sound check, but I was just wanting to clear my stuff off the stage to a degree and clean it up so it looked nice and all that kind of stuff because I had my stuff all over. So I'm trying to pack it up and then it's almost like the old, when you pick up a suitcase and it spills open. It was kind of that scenario. And I had a bunch of my gear go all over and there's like an EBO hits the stage and my batteries go all over. And then this guy who's playing with Leeroy kindly bends down and cleans my crap up with me and is super nice. And I'm like, oh, that's a really nice guy. He doesn't have to do that. And there's I'm noticing the lack of ego from, he plays with the main band, all that kind of stuff, whatever.
Yeah.
So that kind of registers. I go backstage. I tell the guys, he's a really nice dude, blah, blah, blah. That was really sweet. And then I'm walking around getting ready for the show and I just see all the road cases for the band that's there. And a whole bunch of road cases have like Grapes of Wrath written all over them and a Grapes of Wrath sticker and stuff. And I go backstage into the little green room and I say to the guys in the band, I'm like, man, someone has it really bad for the Grapes of Wrath. Like they've got this stuff all over their cases. And they're like, dude, are you like stupid? Like the guitar player for Leeroy is Kevin Kane, one of the founding members of the Grapes of Wrath. And I was just like, oh, that was Kevin Kane who helped me pick all my stuff up. I'm like, that was one of my like, I'm a total idiot moments. But I had to tell that story to Leeroy years later because I was kind of fanning out over the whole thing. I didn't want to say fangirling. Somehow I feel like that's not appropriate for me to say. But that's what I wanted to say. So anyhow, funny story. But I was like, I think I told Leeroy that. I don't need to tell him that again on the podcast. But that was kind of a funny moment for me. And when I think of Leeroy, that somehow always ends up at one of the top of the list things. Because I like to make it about me. No, anyhow. So it was a quicker conversation. It was a good conversation. I really liked his sense of Well, he's always, I've known him to have this real positivity. He used this
Yeah.
phrase once about he just wants to be a light wherever he goes, stuff like that. So I'm just curious because I don't know if you had ever heard Leroy before
I've heard his
this.
name, but
Okay.
like that's the extent.
Yeah. Anything
Yeah.
stick out to you about the conversation?
Yeah. I mean, in the least like negative sounding way, like the conversation, like although obviously very interesting, there was like less moments of like I don't know, like grade school teachers call like aha moments where like
Mhm.
other people with podcasts like say something or like talk about this like revelation they had and you're just like, "Oh, like wow. Like I've never thought about that."
Yeah.
Or talked about something that's like very novel to their life and that is like obviously then what sticks out. I mean, the conversation I had, like the whole conversation was interesting. There wasn't peak moments where I was like, whoa. But kind of nearing the end, he started kind of like, talking about how like he was producing now and you were asking him about like with the new album coming out, like if he was gonna tour and he was just kind of talking about contentness with like where he was at as an artist
Mhm.
and saying that, I'm not trying to make like a hit that's gonna, go viral or be played on the radio and I'm not trying to market myself so hard because if people find my music and they come to me like and my music like then that was like what was meant and like just like the way he was talking it was just like he wasn't trying to chase this artist high of being the most famous to the point of when he was talking about like seeing other artists and his friends who are artists who have made it big and like not feeling envious of where they were at and I just thought that feels so unique
Mhm.
to hear. I feel like with so many, if not all artists, you either hear them say that they're chasing that high and being that big, and that, like, that's kind of
Yeah.
like always a goal, or that, like, that was their goal and it didn't work, and like what they're doing now, you never really hear, like, yeah, I'm not trying to get there. Like, that's not my goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, like, I mean, and it was leading me into what I was going to ask you, and I was going to ask you earlier. I was going to save it for the podcast though, which is what I've done.
Oh, good for
Um,
you.
but yeah, I was just wondering like how you felt about that and like if that's I mean, as someone who's in the music industry and like who's been in the scene, like do you find him saying that unique or is that kind of like there's a lot of people who aren't trying to like go for that and
No, I think that's a really good question, actually, Lexi. Like, so just hearing you say that immediately made me think to the way he was saying it, not just what he was saying, but the way he was
Mhm.
saying it, right? To which I would have a bullshit meter on, maybe at this
Yeah.
point in my life and career. Like, like I hear that sort of conversation. I'll just say like backstage at the folk fest when I talk
Yeah.
amongst people who are sort of in the twilight of their career. Let's put it that way. And well, I got two little pieces to say to it, but specifically to what you ask, I do think it was unique. And the reason I think it was so unique and heartwarming because it was so true.
Mhm.
And the truth is, the thing that you wouldn't see, I think, on the side of the industry yet is that usually that gets delivered by somebody who's probably quite jaded, not
Yeah.
content, right? There would
Yeah.
always be sort of an underlying tone or something in the conversation would have already set that up in the context of, I'm done with it. So when because he named a few things, like you just said, he talked about his friends who are still doing it and some
Mhm.
very successfully. And he's like, I don't know how they still do it. I don't envy that at all anymore. In other words, the grind
Yeah.
and the rat race and the cycles that you have to go through. And he seemed very sincere when he said, I don't really envy that anymore. And he's just sort of tired of having to do a cycle of albums. He'd rather just make the music that inspires him and put it out and
Yeah.
go play shows when the opportunities come out. And him to say, I prefer these opening acts roles where there's no
Mhm.
pressure on me to be the one to fill the room. And, it's especially great if people are nice. Like there's just a sincerity to all that of just
Yeah.
accepting that because for most people's career, they don't want to accept being anybody's opener, right? Like there's,
Mhm.
and so when you hear people talk about it as far down the career as he is, if there's that kind of a reduction from the early days of things, it's usually because there's just a jadedness underneath it all. He didn't
Yeah,
have
I
it.
was gonna say like, I mean, two things is like I was kind of comparing it in my mind of like athletics. Like you don't have someone who
Yep.
wanted to like,
Yep.
make the NHL and then they go and like they play all the way up into like, the league before it. And then you never hear those guys be like, "Oh, like, I actually didn't want to play NHL. I'm really happy with where I got." You always hear them be like either own it or have that jaded sense of like whatever, like I didn't really even want to, like that'd be too much work. And it's
Yeah,
kind of like
that's a good
refreshing,
one.
like, oh, they're just happy with where they made it.
Yeah, I'd
And it
take
was
that
also
even
like,
a step further to say, I feel like where, and I don't know if the guys would agree with me, I feel like where our band, the Wee Pool, got to was like, junior and not quite to the show. Do you know what I mean? Like it just always felt that way. I feel like Leroy's more like the guy who, had a career for quite a while, but if in hockey, say the really good ones play to their mid late 30s, and some
yeah,
guys are done by the time they're 30 years old, or it's starting to wind down or whatever, not to get into the metaphor too much, but yeah, he seemed content with that version, whatever it was.
yeah. And also like he even kind of took it a step further and was like content with how it's been, but also actively being like, oh, I'm happy for that fact even like now, and was like, thankful for like where he was living and the studio he has and like the family and the
Yeah.
health of his
Yeah.
family and like I was like that's I think very being so grounded in like who you have been and also who you are, like especially in that scene. I just thought that was I don't know, kind of special.
I totally agree. And I think that I just love the sincerity of him communicating all of that. And I
Yeah.
guess the thing that struck me about the conversation and his arc and his career, which I think fed right into the part that you just pulled out, which is he's seen a lot of rising and falling.
Yeah.
Or not even, I won't even call it rising and falling. Let's call it in his pursuit up the mountain, he kept having his legs knocked out from underneath him like over and
Yeah.
over again. And I think he's kind of got to the point where it's like, I'm just going to walk.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it just being a stroll wherever I'm going now instead of this mad pursuit up the hill. So
Mm-hmm.
we're just jumping all over metaphors tonight, but that's all right.
Apparently.
Anyhow, that was pretty cool. And I agree. I think that was a really cool message to hear. And I guess from my perspective, since you asked the question, I don't hear that sincerity a lot from somebody who is like at the place where he's at in his
Yeah.
career. You either hear people desperately trying to hold on, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You hear them talk about things like how they're just struggling with redefining themselves. They use that term, you'll see, or you hear people chirping about how they hate that it's all content creation and social media, and
Yeah.
they'll just talk really negatively about that. And there's just these angles that all tell you that they're not in a good place
Yeah.
because they still want the picture that they were chasing when they were young,
Yeah.
right? But
Hmm.
he's not that guy. And I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. Other than our disappointing supper, let's talk about two things really quickly. Number one is we're into March now, and we started going to the gym together 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right from the start of January. And we're in
Yeah.
March, and we're still doing it. No matter what, we're getting up and going. How are you feeling about it? Good?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm feeling good. I love a routine. Yeah. I've been wanting to, we've both been wanting to do that since we went together, what, before COVID?
No, during.
During COVID?
Like when they would reopen the rec center, and I had
Yeah.
a membership. Yeah, and then we would go.
Yeah.
Remember, I used to have to like go online and schedule your time because they would only allow so
Right.
many people in.
Yep.
Yeah, that's when you and I would go. But
I was gonna say we did that. And I mean, I was young, that just feels like a long time ago, 5, 6 years now. And then as soon as we fell off,
it
like, I
wasn't
feel like
five,
you and I,
6 years, but you're allowed to get the math wrong for COVID. It was probably 4 years ago that we started doing that.
2019?
No,
2020?
2020 is when it started, but it wasn't until 2021 that it opened up again, that we could go back to the gym like that.
Oh, okay.
It's okay.
Okay, regardless.
The math, pandemic math is not
It doesn't make
accurate.
sense
It's
anymore.
okay.
No, but my point was we fell off of it eventually. And then the entire time we were not going, we talked about going. And
Yeah.
so I'm glad that we found a time and space that works.
Yeah.
And
Especially the
really enjoying it.
especially the previous 6 months in which we were lamenting
Yeah.
about ourselves and our inactivity and ability to do it. So it's
Yeah.
good. Like, you aren't feeling, I guess when I say, how are you feeling about it? I just mean, do you feel like sometimes when you get back to it and you're trying to do stuff, it's not I don't know if the plateau is a right word, but sometimes you hit that first plateau of, I've been doing the same thing now for 2 months or more. And you get a little either bored or you feeling okay though? Not that.
I mean, there's parts of my kinesiology brain where I'm like critiquing myself, and then
Like your
you know,
form, or whether
not
you're
even my
choosing the
form,
right
just like
exercises, even maybe.
yeah, just like general routine and exercise at the
Mm.
gym. And then I'm like able to affirm myself with like, other knowledge. And then I'm like, you know what? At the end of the day, like I'm going to the gym 3 days a week. I'm running once a week now outside. I'm like, I'm moving. It's fine. Like
You created some
I'll get there.
self-affirmations to get you through.
Ugh, I
Good.
need to start.
You need some self-affirmations. Okay, well, that's
How are
fair.
you feeling?
I feel great. I've been like,
Yeah.
oh yeah. I mean, I haven't gotten bored. I haven't plateaued. I've been introducing a couple of new either machines or exercises, or I've been asking your brother, because he just loves being able to tell people what he knows about that stuff. So he's been helping me, and I've been pushing the numbers up, and so
Love it.
I'm really glad that we made that choice together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the last thing I was going to tell you, but I think you already know, is I think I'm absolutely obsessed with that new song, Flowers,
Oh, you are.
by Nathaniel Rateliff and Gregory Alan Isaacoff. I do that wrong every single time I go to say it. Gregory Alan Isaacoff. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Okay. Did you know that his career went viral and broke open because of a song called Big Black Cars that was on a McDonald's commercial?
I did actually.
Oh, good for you.
Your knowledge. Well, I knew it was because of that song for a long time. Only recently did I learn why it was that song.
Okay. Well, I don't want to dwell on that, but this song Flowers is so good. And anybody who knows me, which is probably most of the people who only listen to the podcast so far, are still people who knew me, but know that the guitar tone of like getting loud, breaking up, almost screaming, because you're not because of volume, but because of how you're playing the tones and the frequencies together, and you have it so deeply washed in reverb and it swells, is the thing that literally makes my soul melt, right? And this song, it comes out of nowhere and does that, despite how incredible their voices sound together. I'm having right now a hard time believing some other song is going to replace it as my favorite in 2025, and it's only the first week of March or whatever. So
well,
that's how much every time I listen to it, I'm liking it more. So
it's
going on the playlist is all I'm saying.
Oh, well, obviously it's going on the playlist. I was gonna say you're pulling a me. You're repeating the same song.
I am.
It's
It's literally all I've been listening to. But
that's so good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, speaking of the gym, you need to get to bed because we're going to be up at 5:45 to go to the gym together tomorrow.
It's true.
So it's a tough life for a girl.
It is, especially when you're just a girl.
Just a girl.
But oh well.
Okay. Thank you for this. Appreciate your time.
Always. I'll see you in the morning.
I'll see you in the morning. Bye-bye.
Bye.